This is Race Hobbs, head of programming over at the UNX Network, and I want to thank you for listening to my good friend, Jeff Kingsbury, on Strange Recon, right here on the X.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence, and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this.
Sign my name on the dotted line.
Sign my name on the dotted line.
All I do is a double time.
All I do is a double time.
Oh, I can't believe you've done this.
Get ready for a surprise.
What's going on, Recon? I hope you're well tonight. It's 9 p.m. over here on the East Coast, right here on the UNX Network. Thank you for joining me and following me over from wherever you found me, wherever you heard about it. Thank you for being here. If you're just already a member of the UNX Network and you the next live show came up and you're listening to me now, thank you so much. If you're a newcomer, please do me a massive favor. Look through the UNX Network, show list right there. Find some interesting topics that you like to go research. Go see what those claims are being had for all you people that deep in the metaphysical and the weird. Perfect for you. www.unxnetwork.com. Please share with your friends. Ladies and gentlemen, on today's show, member of the Invisible Night School, founder of Ufology is Corrupt.com. We have on Luis Cayetano. When we have this conversation is going to be my first time we kind of talked, really, other than just quickly earlier today on the phone and right before the show started. So I'm going to get to know him right with you. Some of you already know him better than me. I feel bad because it took so long for me to get to interview him as one of the members of the Invisible Night School, because I think they're doing some great stuff. So when we get back, we'll talk to him, bring him on, get to know him, hear some of his ideas, talk about Bob Laser or whatever that guy's name is. I don't know. Anyways, Recon after this. Welcome to Strange Recon.
I'm here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
You're out of your mind.
There's nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, which we both knew differently.
No, I saw that. I don't give a goddamn what anybody else says about it. I saw that on film. Phil clasped and kissed my ass. He wasn't there. I was.
When you know all the names in every language of that bird, you know nothing, but absolutely nothing about the bird.
You're crazy. You're crazy. I like you, but you're crazy.
What's going on, folks? All right, our guest here, Mr. Luis Cayetano, if you could. Are we live? Here we go. All right. Welcome to the show, sir.
How's it going?
Good. The video's loading here, so don't worry. He's not a spirit entity. There's a video coming eventually. I don't know if anyone else can. Is it just me that only sees black here? I'm not sure. I apologize for everyone on the video side. On the audio side, he sounds good. Race, how's it? Is it? Can you see him?
I can't see him. I did before the show, but now his screen's black. Lewis, can you refresh your screen?
Yeah, I'll try. Let me just stop the cam and then I'll redo it.
It's really either way, we hear voice audio either way. So while we work on that, we'll talk about something real quick. As I said before the show started, Recon and the UNX Network family, Lewis is the founder of Ufology is Corrupt, and he's on a mission, I would say. Well, maybe not a mission, but he's also a member of the Invisible Night School. So go check out the invisiblenightschool.com and his website and get an idea of just some of the hard work they've put in on some of these people, because of course, one of the parts of ufology, you can't get around it, my friends, is there's always a debate whether some of these people are real or not real. As in real in the sense that their story they're portraying is even remotely close to it, to legitimate. But Lewis, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, sir, again, welcome to the show. And can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you're comfortable saying at least, and then we'll get in a little bit into your life and what led you to where we're at now, of course, your website and everything else.
Thanks. My background is in biology. That's what I did my master's and PhD on. But my interest in ufology is nothing to do with all that stuff. It's just a personal interest, and debunking pseudoscience, which has long been an interest of mine, or a pastime of mine at least. So I'm kind of interested in the psychological and psychosocial aspects of ufology. I don't believe that aliens are coming to Earth or anything like that. I don't believe any of the paranormal explanations, but I do find the whole subculture fairly fascinating, and I think that it does speak to some important issues in society, and then that sort of stuff. So that's where my interest comes from, I guess.
That's pretty cool. I mean, the idea that that the aliens not coming to Earth thing is definitely. It sounds. I mean, you were a fan of Jung. Were you into any of that work?
Yeah, well, with you mean Carl Jung?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
So David Halperin's book Intimate Alien kind of got me into that. I wasn't initially aware of Jung's contributions, but I don't know if you've read Halperin's book. I really recommend it to everyone.
I will.
He gives a kind of Jungian take on ufology, and he goes into some of the famous cases like the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of got me into thinking about Jung, and I don't necessarily credit the archetype explanation that he brings, but I think that the psychosocial explanation is quite compelling, at least.
So what was like, everyone has like their journey through a lot, some of these more esoteric topics, big time, where they go through waves that some people are, I think they don't realize how prevalent they still are today, and oftentimes you can get lost in them. But what triggered you when you first got into ufology, or you first got into these topics that took you down the path of recognizing there was like a darker side and all this other strange pseudo scientific crazy kindness, if you will?
Well, it wasn't until much later than my initial interest, which was the typical thing. A teenager in the 90s, I was into UFOs, and there was a bunch of UFO documentaries back then on TV. I believed the Bob Lazar story back then and all that kind of stuff. But then more recently, after putting all that down, I got into it again, I guess, after I read Halperin's book, and also Leslie Kane's book, which I was initially quite partial to, but then started noticing some discrepancies and problems with that. And that sort of set me off, I guess, a little bit more. And then I read a couple of Jacques Vallée's books, which I initially thought were quite interesting, but he had some weird takes on some things, and I thought there's something a bit wonky going on. So I decided to delve even deeper. And basically that's where I am now, just kind of looking at the dark side of it.
Yeah, I guess I didn't mean to try to focus the conversation too much. In fact, I want to jump back a minute because I feel like I did that. But what can you spell out that book title for us and the author, so even the listeners can go find it, or in a moment?
Oh yeah, it's David Halperin's book. It's called Intimate Alien: The Hidden Story of the UFO. Let me just type it in.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know why I don't know this, and I mean, not that I read books, everyone. I'm a dummy. Don't listen to me. I've never read a book in my life. No, just The Intimate Alien: The Hidden Story of the UFO, David J. Halperin. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll take a look at this. Stanford University Press has it on there. Thank you. And what about it? What about David Halperin's book do you find was the most compelling, or at least the most triggering for you, if you will, or whatever you want to call that would activate you, or at least inspire enough curiosity or interest to keep the coal burning, or the ovens burning, if you will, rather?
I think it was the analysis of how multifaceted the human mind is, and how it can form all these narratives and stories, and people can be completely sincere in believing them. And also the role of myth. So he's got a nice quote, something along the lines of, UFOs are a myth, myths are real. Doesn't mean UFOs are literally physically real, whatever, like if we're talking about alien craft. But myths do have an important role to play in human psychology and human society. And in that sense, UFOs are real. I found that really interesting and important. And the book kind of got into things which made me realize that ufology is not just a fringe topic. It's also got something important to say about how the human mind works, potentially, and how stories spread. So I think the spread of beliefs is very interesting to me.
Can we go back to when you said a minute ago? Let me ask, as someone who's educated in biology, what's your take on astrobiology in like the most falsifiable and safe way one could say? How would you sum up then the idea of alien visitation here? Do you believe it's just like life is possible, but it's most likely not reached that stage, or at least certainly not how we're identifying? Is it? Are you open to the idea of it, if you will?
Oh yeah, I'm open to even the possibility. I'm open to the possibility of even aliens being here. I don't discount anything as an impossibility,
right?
But I don't think it's particularly likely. I do think that the universe probably has a lot of life that's evolved, but I don't think that it's necessarily something like animal life. It's more likely just microbial life for the most part. Even if there was animal life out there, it wouldn't necessarily mean that intelligent life in the sense of human intelligence evolved. And even if you had human level intelligence, it doesn't mean that technological civilization arose. So there's all these steps that need to take place. And we tend to sort of project ourselves into the universe and expect something like us to be out there. In a way, that's what SETI is about, finding signals and
right. We're open.
Technological artifacts. But that's kind of a reflection of us more than anything that has to be out there. So I think that life, under the certain conditions can definitely arise. I don't think it's something that just arose on Earth, if I had to guess, although I don't have any proof that there's alien life. But I certainly don't believe that aliens are coming here. That's because, or two reasons, I guess. First one is that there are certain physics. I'm not a physicist, but from what I've learned about physics from physicists, they tend to discount that, or at least say that it's very unlikely that alien craft could have gotten here. And the other reason is that the human mind is already weird and alien enough. You don't need to also have actual literal aliens, right, to explain a lot of the reports that people make.
Well, I think that's for sure. I think most people, even, I mean, to say something I say often, and a lot of people don't want to believe, but even the data aggregation people, the ones that would really want to make, the alien thing is real, will tell you that like 96 plus 97% are even things in the low information zone are rather explainable. And I mean, that's just where we're at in life. And people from ufology really got to kind of understand that. But what about some of the things within ufology do you feel need to the most awareness on that specific topic needs to be raised right now? And I've heard you talk a little bit about like Nazi cultists, cult things happening. I mean, still, what are your take on all that?
I think that one of the things that people need to understand is the importance of evidence, first of all. Because if you don't have evidence and you don't use science, then you can just make up anything you want and then just make excuses that, oh, this is my experience and science can't touch this. And then it just basically becomes a pseudo-religious or a sort of quasi-religious, thing. And there are a lot of overlaps between ufology and religion, even cults, as I've mentioned on my blog. And then there's the political extremist element. People can use ufology, but also other paranormal subcultures as a way of sneaking in kind of anti-reality or anti-objective ideas. So they're sort of trying to break down the notion that there is an objective reality and that the only thing that exists is a narrative. And I think that's very dangerous. And people are not necessarily sincere when they talk about UFOs. It could just be a conduit for something else, but sometimes they are sincere and everything kind of becomes mixed up. So yeah, I think importance of evidence and also understanding that extremism can arise from these subcultures if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we've spoken about ultimately speaking, of course, no one can know if some of these, if any of these encounters are to some degree are what people think they are, of course, because of that very low chance of that actually happening. And of course, how the human just fills in the gap. It happened to me. It's happened to me multiple times. But I will say, which cases do you feel people have like been utterly convinced themselves. Like I know that we spoke a little bit of Bob Lazar, and I did say that Nazi thing earlier. But is there any cases specifically that come to you that you can reference that you believe that people are truly, utterly convinced, and the answer is rather explainable?
You mean cases where they're convinced that it's aliens?
Yes. Sorry. I mean, because earlier you referenced that people can be like ultimately, truly convinced. Yes, sir.
I think the Ariel case is a good one. Some people hold it up as the gold standard now, like because a bunch of people saw supposedly the same thing. You know, the reaction, like the gut reaction is, how could so many people see something if it wasn't actually there? And you know, there's all kinds of problems with the Ariel case, but I think that it's sort of taken on a life of its own. Certainly, you know, the people in that story have, you know, the story has become taller with the telling. They've added stuff on top of it, which is typical of UFO stories, that they become more elaborate with time. The other one is perhaps the Travis Walton case. At least many people, I think that within ufology, that sort of tends to divide people. So even some fanatical believers reject the Walton story, but others accept it. And again, it's the same sort of thing because it involved multiple people, even though now some people are saying that it was a hoax, like some of the crew members of Walton's group and stuff like that. But and then there's the Bob Lazar case. Many people just assume that because he's been telling the same story, or basically the same story, even though he hasn't, he's changed the story many times, that he has to be telling the truth because supposedly he has not profited from it, even though he has. Supposedly he's suffered from his story, even though he hasn't. And I'm just trying to think. The Betty and Barney Hill case is another good example. I think I would never claim that they were not sincere. I think that they did have an experience, but again, just because you have an experience doesn't mean that the provenance is extraterrestrials.
Yeah, can the Travis case it's always fascinating me, obviously, because I grew up in a time frame when I watched, like, you know, Fire in the Sky, and without knowing much about the reality of the actual case, you know, that was very, you know, to a child, you know, that's or at least a young person, that's a pretty impactful couple scenes in that movie. But when it comes to this topic, but then you find out later it wasn't such the thing. But I was gonna say that you said it, the Travis Walton case, you would think that the divide is, I'm a skeptic, I don't believe it happened, or I believe in abductions that happened. I actually found the people that give me the most trouble on whether or not he was abducted or the whole thing's a hoax, whatever, are actually the people that believe that there's like these magical orbs that are good. So they're before, like, this, there's not even any skeptical voices I can think of that are speaking, other than maybe like Charlie Weiser brings up the Travis case a lot, but it's always like, and I don't want to say any names or anything, but they're very large CE5 groups will come to me and be like, you said this about Walton, their abductions are not real, no one's been abducted, that's a fake, and they're really but then they will tell me they're ascending type of, you know, like, it's kind of abduction, but just different. It's like they're ascending. No, I know it's not the same thing, but they're leading to the same place. So I found that kind of interesting. It's not skeptic versus believer. It's believer versus other type of believer versus other type of believer versus skeptic. And, you know. Yeah,
you get those sorts of splinter groups forming where each one wants to take over the narrative with their own particular view. And I've noticed this a lot with the CE5 crowd and also the New Age kind of woo crowd, who talk a lot about the role of consciousness and orbs as well.
Yeah. There's a heck of a lot about orbs coming back on the other side in the paperwork, so it's a good time for that stuff to come back. Now, I'm not a big fan of orbs. First off, it doesn't even make any sense. A lot of these videos, how could you tell it's an orb when you got one camera looking at it from off in the distance? How could you possibly acquire a shape or, you know, understand? I feel like the term orb is something that comes from a time when I was first growing up in ufology, if you will, where the cameras were being developed, you know, and they were shrinking on the shoulder down to the handheld, and it really changed how lights at night looked. Oh my God, people would literally look at an airplane and hear nothing, and then hear the plane and watch this orb turn into an airplane and suggest, well, the orb transformed into an airplane. And then the cameras, the same video from same spot, the camera developed and the sensors get better and better. And what do you see? It's been an airplane the whole time. It was just part of the culture, the development of our storyline.
Some people just don't want to hear it. Like you provide the countervailing evidence, and that they still insist that their experience is what trumps everything else.
And it's and that's the thing too. And I hate to have to stop and specify all the time. It's just most people aren't claiming that like CE4 experience, if you will, you know, like, so there's like, we're talking most of the time when it comes to a lot of these, the vast majority of them rather are just just alien. It's possible, folks. I think Mr. Cayetano is creative enough and smart enough to know that it's very possible. But when you see a lot of these abduction stories, a lot of them are almost like verbatim retellings of other stories, but just kind of in a new way, and they do evolve. What's your take on like Vallée's? You said you read his work, so Vallée's where the hell is it? I don't even know. Passport to Magonia, where a lot of the stories in there seem to be not so UFO related after all, more just kind of Vallée's choice.
Yeah, I mean, his hypothesis there is that you've got these millennia-old reports of fairies or whatnot, demons and other supernatural entities, and that for him they're part of the same thing, which I think in a way they are. He's onto something there in saying that there is an underlying similarity, but it doesn't mean that they're literally interdimensional beings playing with us. It just means that there could be something about the way that human perception works and how myths evolve, and that in a particular age, the emphasis is going to be different. So currently it's extraterrestrials because we are living in the space age, and we've got high technology. But if you go back to medieval France, then it would have been fairies and what else, forest creatures or whatever, angels and so on. So Vallée, he just goes way too far. He goes too far in a way that's completely unnecessary as well. So I think that if you can explain something by pointing to how culture evolves and how the mind perceives or misperceives things, that's more parsimonious than adding this other layer of interdimensional entities, projecting something onto us.
Yep, and actually, just shortly after, I mean, obviously not shortly after, but the medieval time, you see that we do see a technological jump or leap in ability by humans, and at least repeatable. And the people of France did reignite that whole like Faye or Magonia thing with the airships or hot air balloons to start. The first hot air balloons. It basically was, now they've started to come here in these ships from this often far away world, and they just kind of transformed from something that required probably wings to fly, its own wings, to now something that used what we have that crosses new worlds, ships. When the airship mystery in my mind has been solved for a long time now, and it had nothing to do with interdimensional beings.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned France. France has been very important in this whole thing for a long time. So just what you mentioned now, but also Jacques Bergier and Louis Pauls, who were the authors of Morning of the Magicians. This was, I think, from the 1950s, and it inspired a lot of the ancient aliens mythos later on, which it was picked up by and plagiarized by Eric von Daniken and other people. And then, of course, you've got Jacques Vallée, who kind of in a way brings up his own ancient astronaut idea, but instead of aliens, it's interdimensionals. But a lot of this just sounds like, I don't know if you've watched Twin Peaks, the original Twin Peaks.
Of course, yeah. The last 2-3 episodes were this whole thing right now. This whole retelling of Ufology.
I think David Lynch may have probably read some of this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd read some of Jacques Vallée's work, although I don't know of any proof that he has, but a lot of it just really rings true to that type of genre.
Yeah, there was definitely a big change in like the whole time. Like, well, whatever. It was just a perfect. I don't know how to explain it. And I just feel like you are describing it though. Valet was Keel, Valet, and a few others were like retelling it through a way they were trying to explain it, and they even kind of reference like a projector.
Mm-hmm.
Like they even used the term projector because that's something they were utilizing every day, like for work, like these giant projectors and stuff. And when he was mapping stuff and other things, and it was just, I just feel like they just, it helped one of the people that helped transfer it into the modern day folklore myth and just carry it on and keep the torch going. But I don't know. It's I do still hold true to that one of these cases are going to be a real deal. I had someone in the chat said something earlier. I wanted to make sure I grabbed it, but I don't remember what it was. Oh no, I guess it's not there. So like, I guess we I don't want to just ask you one or two things and skip around and really have a conversation with you. What are some of the things that are interesting you right now? Like some of the interests that have you completely going at it?
I guess the far right aspect, and don't get me wrong, there's also a far left aspect, but I've been reading a couple of books by S.D. Tucker about Nazi UFOs, and explaining how the Nazi UFOs myth kind of evolved after the war, and how that was in a period where people were fascinated by Nazism, and it got kind of conflated with UFOs as well. So you might have heard of this idea that the Nazis fled to Antarctica and they set up a base there, and then they built UFOs and stuff like that. But a lot of fascist literature actually is very mystical and esoteric in nature, and often makes references to UFOs and flying saucers and other dimensions and things like that. And I just find all that pretty fascinating, but still very disturbing, obviously. So that's sort of what I'm looking into at the moment. I do sometimes, well, if you go on Twitter, I'm not on Twitter right now, but there does seem to be a bit of a kind of, I don't want to say extreme far right thing going on necessarily, but there is kind of this push against consensus reality and this kind of bias towards thinking that, all this, whatever the government says is necessarily just disinformation. So, obviously the government has lied and it does lie, but there's this sort of anti-scientific backlash within a lot of ufology, which just rejects everything that the government says.
Yeah.
And that's problematic. And a lot of that is tied up with a kind of far right ideology. So, like Stop the Steal and all that sort of stuff. You do find references to, who was that guy? Shaman, that guy with the big horns. He was at the
that Q is a Q conspiracy. Am I saying that right? I don't even know.
Yeah, the Q Shaman or somebody. He was making reference to secret government UFOs and stuff like that. So we shouldn't be surprised that there's overlap there.
Yeah, I've heard that for a long time now. In fact, I remember being in a conversation with someone probably like, I don't know, 6 years ago, and it was someone was saying that ufology got taken over by crazy right-wing nut jobs or something. And I thought, well, maybe that's true in some aspects, but I have heard, very connected individuals that come from a completely different party, but they have one thing in common with it. It's not the crazy right-wing nut job that I've seen a lot of the people had referenced years ago. It just the equivalency was they both had tons of money. The person from the other party and then the crazy right-wing and the person they were referencing was pretty crazy. I know that's a word I shouldn't be using, but no, I do agree with you though. There are certainly things that tie back that you find today, and I do also agree. I think that like the Nazi, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't think it went anywhere. And I said it on Twitter the other day. We didn't stamp out Nazis, we adopted them, and of course everyone knows the old Operation Paperclip and other things, but it wasn't just that. During World War II, there was a lot of German descent people right here, like advertising basically.
Yeah.
Before the Americans jump into the war, it was kind of like this pro Hitler thing that happened in America, and it was not some small scale thing. Every major city had their version of something. I can't really think of any of the group names, but yeah,
the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga.
Yeah, they were the largest, weren't they?
Yeah.
And they were in New York City, I believe, or maybe it was Philadelphia or something like that. I can't remember. They had a headquarters somewhere, but yeah, it was insanely common, and it went away later, of course, when I want to say propaganda, of course, but it's not like fake propaganda, but the idea of what we saw afterwards, what the public was exposed to, and the betrayal of what was going on in Poland and other places, until then they, the idea was then it wasn't suddenly so cool anymore. I hated Hitler before people started hating him. I just want to say that now, everyone. Okay. Anyways, I'm sorry. What are some of the more occult-like things from the Nazis? Can you talk about? Because I don't really know anything about it, and people send me stuff all the time on Twitter, man. What are some of the things I should look out for?
So there are these famous or these important neo-fascist or far-right writers and philosophers within the genre who have brought up UFOs and flying saucers. So some of them include people like Miguel Serrano, who was a Chilean diplomat, and he was a esoteric Hitlerist. He was into things like Kundalini yoga and
holy shit.
He believed in chakras and all that. And that was actually quite typical of many Nazis. They believed in a lot of Eastern type mystical ideas.
Yoga? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, Kundalini. They've been in trouble a few times recently.
And he believed that you could actually literally turn into a UFO. If you concentrated your will, you can turn into a Vimana. And a lot of other crazy stuff like that. But the way that it was described is in these sort of alchemical terms. And that's very typical of fascist literature as well, is that you're describing a kind of symbolic reality behind the actual reality. And that if you can transcend the physical reality, you get to this truer reality behind the scenes. So really, I think it was like the Nazis lost World War II. They were beaten militarily. Germany was occupied and, became a democracy in the West and Soviet communism in the East. And but many fascists and Nazis who had fought in the war, they used UFOs and all this mystical stuff as a sort of revivalist movement. So the hope was that they were still fighting, but not on the physical plane. They were fighting like on the spiritual and symbolic plane. And that one day
Vikings,
the Nazis could, come back and reconquer the world. That's sort of what the Antarctic UFO story is about, that they fled to Antarctica to set up a base there, and that all the UFO sightings that we've seen since World War II are just Nazi-operated machines, and that they're going to make a comeback. So it's like a revivalist hope.
That sounds also like I didn't mean to interrupt you there a moment ago. That does sound like another saga. And as you know, I'm sure the Vikings made many quotes to Viking, myth and legend and things like that in their own sagas in the past. Obviously, the Germanic descent and people shared many stories and things like that. So I find that sounds very similar to a new land.
Yeah,
they've gone off to Valhalla or what? Not Valhalla. What's the one in between? No, maybe it is Valhalla that they go to before they come back. I don't know. But they fight every day. They come back. They win the world over in a great. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's I've noticed it's not really gone anywhere. Recently, there's been like a new run at Nazis and ufology. Not that it's gone anywhere majorly, but we see people talking about stuff like the Vril. And we have a lady who I don't know her deal. I haven't really looked her up, but she believes she's like a Vril general. She's speaking at UFO conferences. What can you say about that?
Yeah, that's really bizarre, but not unsurprising either. It's like these people are sort of testing the waters, and they're kind of saying outrageous things. And when they're challenged on them, they sort of pull back a little bit and they say, "Oh, I didn't really mean it like that. It's just that I meant it like this." but they use these sort of UFO and alien themed and paranormal themed ideas to sneak in their ideology, because UFOs are really fun and they're really interesting. So this is actually something that Ernst Zundel did. He was a famous Holocaust denier, and he straight up admitted once that he used UFOs as a way to get young people to get on board with him. So, because the idea is that if you can get people to believe in UFOs and that the government has been hiding them, then what else has history lied about? Maybe the Holocaust didn't happen. So you see how it's like a conduit.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Get people to believe increasingly insane things.
It's certainly conspiracies. I always felt were like the real gateway drug.
Yeah.
Because a couple really strong anecdotes, and what happens is, and I do it sometimes, but you like match up things like like the CIA helping the medical industry lose mass credibility by like faking vaccines in Afghanistan to find Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
Like that's damaging. And and comparing it to say, well, I don't see anyone around me dropping dead of COVID, so therefore the vaccine thing in Afghanistan equals the vaccine thing here in the US. I mean, there's a lot. I didn't even realize before I started my show how easily people can do that with the things you're saying. I'm like, whoa. No. I'm only referencing that because people say there's no support for any such claim that there has been any the word vaccination or vaccine or whatever overseas and whatnot. But it's pretty scary how fast you can slip into conspiracies, and some of them end up being true. I mean, most political things that we know today that are weird and were unknown at the time were brought forth by a conspiracy, if you will. But it usually is far more on the ground than their shape-shifting queens and kings running the globe. I mean, I think we can agree with that.
Right. And there is also science has become so complex and rarefied that people have become increasingly alienated from it. And so how do you explain to people like these complex phenomena that science knows about and is investigating? Sometimes it's very difficult, especially when there's a breakdown in trust of public institutions. That can lead to people kind of trying to find answers in mysticism or in anti-science or pseudoscience stories.
Yeah, there's anthropologically speaking, I can't think of a time where all humans are on the same level of intelligence. And I don't think I hear scientists and journalists trying to like make it seem like science has done a bad job at portraying just what they've done to get here. So, people automatically can kind of just break down what a scientist has worked on his entire life or her entire life in a matter of moments. Watch a single YouTube video and it's over.
Yeah.
And that's pretty messed up, right? We can say that's not great. But what I will say, though, I do think I have a little hope for it is that there is so many YouTube videos trying to break down things for people and for free, and there's so many people, maybe not in the West so much, I mean obviously there is a ton, but and elsewhere in the world, developing countries, that is like the easiest education there is. You're having someone basically break down the history in the development of science through philosophy and whatnot, and then away they go, which is pretty cool to think about that some of this tech is bringing that out there. Though it is kind of scary, like you said, that so many people have access to it and they're not interested in looking into it because, well, it's more comfortable feeling secure. And having,
they already feel like it's suspect because it's coming from quote unquote the establishment, which
big paleontology.
Or big archaeology or whatever.
Big archaeology. Yeah, I heard that once.
It's not just aliens either. It's also
everything.
Atlantis, and there's a new show on Netflix by Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
And he's been at it for decades, but his stories are really no more scientific than ancient astronauts, but people lap it up anyway.
It's very his show is interesting. in the sense that it invigorates it. Well, first off, it's triggering. I joke about it all the time. If you ever want to gain an audience really quickly, you need to speak in a sciencey way and turn with the group and point at the science community and say, they're stopping progress.
Yeah.
They're trying, and it's a very good way to trigger people. And I will say, this guy can do it with the best of them because he has a very even way of saying things and suggesting something like some sort of universal civilization that was traveling around giving people handbags full of seeds and domesticated bulls. I don't understand what he's saying, but he without actually saying it, and he's not. It's forbidden archaeology. That's all it is. Forbidden archaeology retold. I forgot that author, but it's almost the exact story, and I'm sure it comes from earlier and earlier and earlier. I just don't know. I'm not smart enough, but he's a rough one. And plus, they'll pull up anecdotes of like human ancestors were using fire as a tool all these years ago. I think that was expected to be discovered eventually. The manipulation of hand tools to smash things. We've observed animals today that are far down the line and non-developing, if you will, hominid families, and they're using tools to spear fish once in a while. It's novel, it's radical, but it's happening. I mean, it's not crazy, but I don't know. What do you think about Gary Nolan, by the way, his interview? Did you see his interview the other day when he basically brings back eugenics? I'm not sure if that's okay if I say that, but on the radio station. But did you see that by chance?
I did not.
Well, essentially there's a master race coming. I wonder where this comes from. I don't know if you've heard anything about this. There's a master race coming, and they're actually going to be able to speak to the alien and even manifest it because of this swollen part of their brain. And actually, he found, anecdotally speaking, that they attract mates that have that same swollen bit. Maybe it's from abductions. Who knows? What do you think?
It sounds like a rehashing of Real, and also basically, you should also check out Jules Evans. He has got this great series on spiritual eugenics, and his website is philosophyforlife.org or .com. Now he talked about how eugenics ideas have long been intertwined in spiritualist thinking, and vice versa. I'm not saying that they're one and the same, but they've certainly got a historical overlap. And the idea that some groups of people, by virtue of some trait that they have, maybe genetics, are more in tune with the spirit world or with insight, or they're more intelligent. This seems to be a recurring theme in spiritualism, and you see it a lot with things like the starseed subculture, right? That you can communicate with aliens, or that you actually are an alien because of your DNA, human hybrids and stuff like that. And it's really, I think, a narcissistic outlet for just problems in our society, alienation, feelings of alienation, and just being confused about cause and effect, lack of science, education, and so on. But I don't know, like Nolan's, I don't know the specifics of his claims, but it just seems like there's nothing new under the sun.
Well, he's gonna
tweaked, but there's no real difference.
I get worried about when Nolan starts to talk about this stuff, because for one thing, he mentions it. The original cases that he's reviewing, come from dubious sources. Well, I don't know. He didn't say that. He said they come from the intelligence community. But then he also comes up with a story that sounds remarkably similar to something like Kit Green or How Put Off is said in the past. And I hope to address those topics in the near future. And of course, I'm not, I don't have my own lab at Stanford. So I can't, I'm not on, he's cited in 44 different papers, and he has 12 of his own, and he's making really radical claims about the stuff. And I'm really not ready to have that conversation. But I will say that I get worried when his findings are so remarkably similar to something I've been on to for 25 years and suspicious about.
Yes.
And that is weird to me. A guy that can have his own lab at Stanford, his own tab right there at Stanford EDU, and his findings line up exactly. Now, either I'm way off and wrong here, and some of these people are related to King Arthur and things like that, and can summon UFOs and not through their consciousness or something, or he's, like you just said, kind of like repeddling something we've seen before. And the fact that he's claiming he's working right now for the intelligence community on those things, that seems a little weird, right? I'm not trying to add conspiracy to it, but that does seem a little strange.
Yeah. We have to be aware of the possible government involvement, whatever that means.
Whatever it means.
I mean, Jack Brewer's done a lot of good work. Jack Brewer's actually looked into Gary Nolan's claims, I think, in a long article on his blog. Some of the problems and limitations. I mean, Nolan, when he's sort of pushed, he will kind of back away from saying that it's aliens or whatever. But
I've noticed, yeah.
When he's sort of left to his own devices, he really leans into it.
Absolutely.
That's something that I've noticed as well among a lot of these people, is that they back away when you kind of push them and ask them for specifics, and pin them down to say, are you saying this or not? And they kind of say, no, I'm not really saying that. But then when they, you lean away, they kind of lean in again into the topic, and they make these wild claims. Yeah, that's a recurring theme, I think.
I get worried when I hear him say things like being chosen.
Yeah.
And that is something I've kind of been on about, like like we've spoken about earlier, since I was a youngster, and I've always been weirded out by that when it came to this topic, because and I'm looking at things like Heaven's Gate and stuff, like they were chosen, and they thought, whatever, and they thought they were ascending, and I don't know, that's not at all what I'm, but it's where it can lead in certain places. We already see how it can radically activate belief, or rather acting upon belief, and over the last 5 years. And so I'm not sure. Do you think that Gary Nolan at least is just but do you think he believes what he's saying because of these vetted cases allegedly that he's looking into? And
I would venture that he half believes it.
Yeah,
he allows himself to believe it, but I have doubts that he's a complete huckster, because he is a professional. He's obviously got a lot of knowledge in his field.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just not sure that knowledge is it really adds anything to, saying that he's more credible than anyone else. For example, his association with Ross Coulthard and the metal ball that he was sent, or the scrapings from it. Why is it being sent to an immunologist? That sort of thing. So it seems he's kind of being used, or he's allowing himself to be used by people who are naive at best. Let's put it that way.
He definitely had some. I heard he just had commented on that, saying that Ross didn't mean to advertise like the way he had no say in the headlines and all that stuff. And it just, to me, him saying that the test results on the metal ball shavings were a joke, and they only did certain tests on it. They only used certain machines, and I don't know why he's the one doing it. And that's been asked before, and I think it remains open. Why we need to hear some answers on that one. Why him out of all people? Why is the alien baby going to him? Why are the test pilots going to him, or whoever it is? But before we're running out of time, but let's talk about Bob Lazar. Talk about Bob Lazar quick if we could, because he seems to be a focus of yours in the past, and he's been and it's a person that everyone knows about in ufology, right? Like if you're around a campfire, everyone has a Bob Lazar take. Everyone has an opinion on him. Let's go broad take real quick. Bob Lazar. What's your take, broad view of him?
He's just guy who chats fake stories for whatever reason. He does profit from them, but I don't think that's his main motivation. I think that it's more of a psychological thing that he gets from it, maybe like a sense of esteem or adulation from a crowd of believers. I think that's probably more important, or just the feeling that he's smarter than everyone else because he can trick them. Some people do that, but I mean, none of his claims stand up to scrutiny. He never stands in front of actual physicists to detail his story, even though he supposedly is one. He doesn't provide any tangible evidence for any of his claims. Virtually every single claim that he makes, we can trace the source of inspiration for it from something that was already being talked about in the 1980s. And that includes a lot of UFO documentaries and TV specials. In fact, I've got a long list of time-stamped videos on my blog showing exactly this trope was mentioned in 1975 in the Outer Space Connection. or it was mentioned in 1980s In Search of UFOs. And it's just ridiculous how many of these tropes are recycled.
You know who? I don't know. What year did you make your website?
It was made beginning of this year, I should say.
In the show, okay. I was gonna say, you know, who would have loved reading your website? Stanton Friedman.
Yeah.
I bet you he would have loved it, because obviously Stanton did a pretty thorough job in looking at a lot of the Bob's claims over the years, and I really didn't dig some of the stuff Stanton said or claimed or believed, but either way, when I looked at what he said about Bob, and you know, we only have you for a minute and a half left, but I please, you know, they can find a lot of your work obviously over on your website, right? And then over at the Invisible Night School, you cover a lot of these topics. You will be on my show in the near future, hopefully, and people that want to see a longer interview, longer take of this, we'll get into something very specific on the show, hopefully. And yeah, so everyone, please go head over to www.ufologyiscorrupt.com. That's the name right there. Ufologyiscorrupt.com. That's a name that will get some attention for sure. And the invisiblenightschool.com. We are all out of time, and I really appreciate. Oh, well, we got about a minute left. Why don't we closing statement from you, sir? You got about 30 seconds.
Give
some advice to the audience. Sorry.
Read science, stay in college, get your title, and try to think critically. That's basically my main take.
You know, I do like the add weights to the other side of the scale, the other side of that dirty coin. And unfortunately, a lot of people want to reject it. It's like giving a dog a bath. The Invisible Night School is like giving a dog a bath. It's good for it. They know it's good for it, I think, but they just can't stand it. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching, and go subscribe, hit that like and whatever. Stay tuned for Jimmy Church up next right here on the X.